like to now call upon Dr. Carson. Thank you.
Well, two presenters, both on time. Of course, I'm an academic, and I only know how to speak in 50-minute blocks. So we're in great shape. So I'd like to pick up on two themes. One is community strategic planning that Lauren mentioned. And because tourism has come up and been a big theme, I'd like to address that a little bit too, and maybe in the form of a little case study based on a research project I did, and I'll see if I can get at the themes through this. So the project that I was involved in was in a little town called Atikokan, which is sort of halfway between Thunder Bay and Fort Frances. It's a classic remote resource-based town. It shares many characteristics with thousands of communities across North America. So Atikokan's story is that its mines closed in the 70s. The forest products, the fiberboard plant either went bankrupt, the sawmill closed, and the only remaining employer of any size is the Ontario government's power generator, one of the 4 remaining coal-fired generators that's scheduled to be closed. And so the government sponsored quite a bit of research, about $4 million worth, to find ways of replacing coal with pelletized biomass. So there were about 6 universities in the research projects, Queen's being one. And Queen's, the main project leaders were mechanical engineering and geography, and I was sort of tagging along as the business guy. And so my part of the project was to look at community strategic planning, and it was very, very case-based. So you can see here, and I won't go through it, just my prep was largely document review, and then my research assistant and I interviewed about 25 people across the community in each of the relevant sectors. Why should we be worried about something like this anyway? And part of the reason is that small resource-based communities are dying all across North America, and part of my project was to look at the impact of well-intended environmental legislation and the devastating impact that it can have on communities. And if you think of the cod fishing moratorium, new pollution emission standards for coal has caused about 1,000 mines in Appalachia in the U.S. to close, and on and on and on. And so Atikokan could be one of these, and its remoteness and its absence of a diversified economy make it just a sort of sitting duck. So the quick vignette of the story is that its history really started in the 1940s with the discovery of massive iron ore deposits, and so an engineering marvel of its day, 2 lakes were dammed and dredged, and the iron ore was mined. But this was very high-grade ore, and its major export markets were, of course, in the U.S. Technologies changed, and it became easier to process much lower grades of ore and much less expensively, and so, lo and behold, the mines eventually closed. Now, forest products sprang up and kept the company going. There was a fiberboard plant and a big sawmill. But eventually, the markets for softwood dried up, and they began to decline precipitously. And so as I mentioned, the large remaining employer is the power station. Now, the environmental legislation brought in by the McGuinty government some years ago was a great coup for environmentalists, and people liked it a lot, and it was well considered and well thought through, but it was going to have potentially devastating impact on Atikokan, because unlike the locations of the other 3 generators in the south and by more populous regions, it did not have an economy that was sufficiently resilient to deal with it. So when my research assistant and I were leaving in August of 2008 on our final day of interviewing, the only remaining children's clothing store was closing, and I thought it sounded a little bit prophetic for what was to come. So the strategic planning process, well, Atikokan has what I would call a recruitment strategy. Sort of any business is good business in a sense, and that's what most municipalities do. Is that the office, whether it's a development corporation or whether it's a city hall, wait for business to come in, and if it's going to give employment, then that's generally pretty good. But what that strategy lacks is a blueprint, a sense of what does the economy of the future actually look like. So in this case, the economy was essentially a single industry town, and there are lots and lots of them. Is that what you're looking for? And in a way, that's what Atikokan is looking for. They're waiting for some mining development to occur, or the return of the wood products industries, and but that's not looking forward and saying, do we want a cluster economy? Do we want a widely diversified economy? Just exactly what do we want it to look like? So the federal government and provincial government chipped in about $200,000 each to hire economic consultants whose job it was to find or discover, analyze economic opportunities that might be used to replace the tax base and the loss of employment that was going to occur if the power station closed. And so this resulted in a lengthy report. It had about 30 different initiatives and 13 of them prioritized. Now, since so much of your discussions today have been on tourism, I thought maybe I'd just look at the tourism part of what they had to suggest. And so essentially it was a town beautification, expanding the fishing derby, and lobbying for access to a major provincial park, or not a closer access road that's about 20 minutes away. So development people often look at the base of planning in terms of what your capacities are, what you're capable of doing, and what resources do you need to do that. And so, do you have, in terms of capacity, do you have sufficient management expertise in a particular area to develop into a new industry? And what do you need to make that go? So I thought, well, let's just look at tourism, but let's compare it quickly with Elliott Lake. As you know, Ellicottville is where I used to take the kids skiing. Elliott Lake actually was a uranium town that started in the 50s and closed essentially in the 60s when the American government, American Army, American Armed Forces decided they would no longer buy uranium from Ellicott Lake. And so essentially it came to be reborn as a tourist destination and as a retirement community. And the reason I'm showing you this slide is that it's physically very attractive. There's Atikokan. Now that's unfair to Atikokan because it's black and white and it's not. You get the point. But the reality is of Atikokan is that although its residents are fantastically enthusiastic about living in Atikokan,